everyone. A warm welcome to this session on investing trends in South Asia post-COVID-19. I'm Komal Sahu, Chief of Sustainable Finance at AVPN. It's great to have you all with us today. AVPN is a network of funders and resource providers with over 600 members across 32 markets. Our mandate is to move more capital towards impact in Asia by providing social investors like yourselves opportunities to connect, lead, and learn. I will be your MC for this session. My role is to ensure that your experience is a meaningful one. If you find my voice or video is lagging, it may be due to internet bandwidth issues. It may help to log out and log back in again. If you're facing any technical challenges, such as difficulty in hearing the speakers, please do not hesitate to type in the chat box and we will try and address your query as soon as possible. Before we kick off our session, I'd like to highlight a few features of this room. Please note that this session will be recorded and you will be able to access the recording from conference.avpn.asia. We will have dedicated time for Q&A at the end of the discussion, so stay with us. You can ask questions during the panel discussion. Feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box and we will convey these questions to our speakers. You can post your questions anonymously or with your name on it. You can also upvote questions posted by others if you'd like that particular question to be answered. Upvoted questions will have a higher chance of being picked up by the speakers. Due to time constraints, the speakers may not be able to respond to all your questions. We're monitoring this behind the scenes and we will try to address as many as possible. At the beginning and at the end of the session, you will be able to participate in polls and I will guide you through those. Finally, to continue chatting with the speakers and fellow delegates in this session, please make full use of the AVPN connector. The link may be found in the chat. Before I hand over the mic, we would like to get to know you better. Please take a minute to fill out the polls below. It appears that 94% of the people in the audience today are from Asia. So this is very, very relevant session for them. It's sobering to hear that most of you think that the recovery will be a U-shaped one. We sincerely and hope that it will be a V-shaped one. With that said, I would like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Prabhu Tirupati. Prabhu is a principal at COIS. He specializes in impact investing and innovative financing for disruptive healthcare and social enterprises. He has over 9 years experience in healthcare, strategy consulting and private equity, and manages the healthcare portfolio at COIS across India and other global markets. With that, the mic is yours, Prabhu.
Thanks. Have been witnessed across the board. Layoffs, lower to nil revenues, payment defaults, and pay cuts. At the same time, many startups have pivoted to be relevant in these times. Funds and foundations have doubled down on existing portfolios and have been providing protection capital. In addition, specifically in India, funds Mainstream and Impact have come together to set up an unprecedented and unique COVID-19 focused grant facility. Different actors have had different roles to play in the scenario, each with their own institutional mandate and challenges. Today, we'll hear from 3 distinguished investors across the spectrum from the Mainstream, Impact, and Development Finance areas in South Asia. And they will be providing us with their perspectives on the current situation and their prediction for the future in a post-COVID environment. I will now go on to introduce each of the panelists. Firstly, joining me for the conversation on impact investing in South Asia is Ritu Verma. Ritu is a co-founder and managing partner at Anku Capital, an early-stage venture capital firm that invests in innovations. And Ritu holds board and board observer positions at many of Anku's portfolio firms, Cropin, Agrix, Niramai, and Big Hat. She is passionate about disruptive technologies across multiple sectors. Next, joining me as the second panelist is Salim Khan. Salim is the India Director for the British Asian Trust with more than 2 decades of experience, spanning across the private sector and the not-for-profit sector. He has extensive experience of creating and nurturing philanthropic businesses and cultural relationships across India and South Asia. which are helping tackle some of the most pressing issues across the subcontinent. Also joining us is Sudhir Sethi. Sudhir is founder and chairman of Chirate Ventures India Advisors. Chirate Ventures is a leading VC firm advising AUM of about 750 million and is based out of Bangalore. Since 1998, Sudhir and his team have advised on investments into 100 plus firms across deep tech, digital consumer, enterprise software, fintech, and the health sectors. So that's your panelists, and we are glad to bring a set of panelists across the spectrum. I'll now start off with the questions to the panelists. The current situation in South Asia has been critical. Most of the countries are slowly emerging out of COVID-19, and we are just seeing the green shoots of recovery in South Asia. Question from the audience towards the panelists, and would love to hear the answers from all three of the panelists. What are companies and impact investors doing right now? Are there changes to the revenue models? And where is capital most needed? And what opportunities could emerge post-COVID-19? Would love to hear from each of the three panelists.
Anybody in particular you want to start with?
Go ahead, Ritu.
Go ahead. Okay, let me give you my perspectives. So yes, I think it's very early days. I think what we've come to is, at least in the Indian context, is Unlock 1.0. So I still think it's very early days, and I think anybody's bet is, can be right here. It's anyone's guess. I think from a lens of an investor and a lens of the startups, I think the critical piece here is to be, prepared, right? I think the first phase of this economic, of the lockdown threw everybody out of gear and took chaos, and those are the words that I can think of, mayhem, right, of actually handling and dealing with it, whether it was the external world, whether it was internally in your organization, because it hit you unexpectedly, and people were not prepared for this. But this next phase here, which also I would say is an unknown phase, it's what I like to call we don't know, I think requires preparedness, right? So at least we now have the warning signals of what can and cannot happen, and business may not be exactly the same. So I think startups particularly need to be gearing for what, in my opinion, is not a short phase, it's a longish phase, and be ready and feeling out what's happening to be able to pull in the opportunities here that will make them survive through this phase till we get out of on the other side here. And that means new business models, tapping into newer opportunities, and at sometimes things are going very well because these are tailwinds, not headwinds, actually gearing up to be able to deliver to the new sets of demands that have arisen. Yeah, so that's my view.
Thanks, Ritu. Sudhir and Salim, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, totally. And just to add to it, I totally agree with what Ritu said. And clearly, these are going to be times of innovations, times of thinking, raising flexible financing as much as possible, taking a back step and seeing what the real issues really are, because what we are witnessing right now are situations which are unprecedented. We've never witnessed something like this. So clearly a time for private capital to join hands with philanthropic capital and really taking a deeper look at what issues are, how do you blend these finances, and how you can make larger impact and scale. And that would require involving and working closely with the civil societies, with the government. So clearly, all parties coming together, thinking deeper, pooling in, flexible funding to make large scale and sustainable impact.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, Prabhu, I think you asked 4 questions. So, if I may answer all 4 one by one. First, what are the companies and investors doing? I think, let me give you the intensity of the challenge which was there. On 22nd or 23rd of March, um, when the lockdown was executed inside the country by the government, it's amazing that 1 billion people went under lockdown, and broadly it was pretty peaceful. Um, if you look at our companies, the total revenue of our companies was on 21st of March, $1 billion. And on 22nd of March, it came to zero, right? It was a square wave like this. So effectively, it's very crucial that there will be stress in the entrepreneur, there will be stress in the VC for the board and the entrepreneurs to get together. I think I'm addressing the softer issue first because this was unprecedented. And what we advised and what entrepreneurs did was first survive, okay, increase the runway. So the growth of the company was of no longer issue. Survive, get cash flow positive in a very defined time frame, and there were many ways which all of us know the companies did, and then over a period of time start addressing growth. From an investor point of view, it was very important for us to assist our companies wherever capital is there. Whether you had 100 million in the bank or 1 million in the bank, you still had to turn cash flow positive. I think we also discovered, along with the entrepreneurs, that perhaps during the time of surplus capital, and I say surplus hindsight, companies in terms of costs had perhaps bloated themselves anywhere between 10 to 30%. So there was a discovery that what we were doing could be more efficient. We also had to connect with our LPs. As an investor, there are 2 things we do. We obviously assist the entrepreneurs, we back the entrepreneurs. We also have clients called the LPs, and we had to communicate to them extremely well and literally on a daily or a weekly basis. So there was a 2-pronged approach there. As far as we are concerned, we did stress analysis on our companies twice, and we did a business stress analysis, and we did a capital runway stress analysis as to how long the companies would last. And in some of our companies which were doing well still, we actually went out raising capital. So it was not that all the companies were doing badly. There were some companies. So within a VC, what the VC does is it sort of, in times of stress, it reallocates capital where the chances of success of returns are going to be further high. So effectively, these are the things which we did. But what entrepreneurs did was magical. I think entrepreneurs were extremely mature. There were new business models which came, new revenue models, new products and services with absolute agility. One of our companies, CureFit, turned digital. Healthify.me went more global. Bizongo, which is in the technology packaging space, introduced the whole space of COVID-related products in the market space. And the HealthPlix, as a small company, introduced live doctor consultations, and they scaled up massively. So effectively, we saw that the definitions of what is essential in the market and what has a quote unquote major impact was different. For instance, we never thought that baby products would be essential in the market, but babies grow and FirstCry revenue started growing. So effectively, we saw different consumer behavior in the market. It was very important to identify that and make sure that new products and new services come and do the needful there. So I think broadly speaking, this is what happened. And we also said, look, let's identify new opportunities. What were the new opportunities which were working? And hindsight now, it's been about 10 weeks. New opportunities which, so the physical side of the business completely shut down for the first 1 month or 2 months. Wherever businesses were growing with clustering and bigger number of people coming together, now businesses had to grow with declustering. So the physical part had gone away. Digital became absolute. Digital at home, online. Many of our companies which had not, I mean, half of our companies have gone global already, but we saw more companies going global and more companies going global because they were digital in nature. So effectively, the turning of this into an opportunity was very, very essential for us. Now, we also said, look, the companies which are likely to survive, and we discussed that with our entrepreneurs, are the companies which have a product which is going to be absolutely solving a real problem in the market space. and identify those which are going to be relevant during COVID times also. Those companies are doing much, much better, which in sector terms would be health, would be education, would be robotics, would be artificial intelligence. In the finance, it would be lending, and so on and so forth. So I think broadly, these are the steps which were taken.
Thanks, all three. I think the one keyword I heard from all three of you was a new. Ritu, you said there are going to be new sets of demands. And then Salim, you said there are going to be new forms of financing and blending different forms of financing. And Sudhir, thanks for shedding some light on how both of these have led to newer markets, newer demographics, and newer consumer behaviors as well. We want to dive deeper into what you spoke about. Ritu, maybe starting off with you. As an impact investor, could you shed some light on the phasing of the economic recovery and how impact investors are preparing to go through the different phases of the economic recovery, especially in the India context?
Sure, and I will speak from the India context because that is what I know mostly. So, I mean, we've talked about, to me, there are three phases here, right? And I think we've just emerging out of the first phase, which I spoke about earlier, was chaos, mayhem, people reacting, right, in many ways to a fact that you are completely locked down, as Sudhir said, 1.3 billion people just locked up in 4 hours, right? So, which is something that you have to deal with, a company and an entrepreneur has to deal with. What does this mean, right? Like, how do I keep doing? And so you're struggling to keep doing what you have been doing. And that's kind of a human nature, right? We all want to kind of say, how do I get this back to normal tomorrow, right? As soon as I can. And it takes a little while to realize, guess what? We may be moving towards a different normal here as to what would happen. And I think we're now entering that phase, and yes, we've unlocked, etc. But as I said earlier, I think we're entering a phase here where we actually don't know, right? Whether they're V's, U's, W's, we have no idea at this point of time. But what we do know is that, look, this is going to stay for some time. And so we all have to adapt and survive in that time period, right? And the third, I think, after we emerge from this, and I like to call that the new, right? And I think things aren't going to be the same, right? I think because of the length of the period that all of us are going to go through it. And, this is going to lead to behavior changes, right? We're already seeing those happen. So I think there is a need to adjust for the new here. But let me come back to as an investor, right? So as an impact investor, we invest in the next billion. So we are investing in markets, which are mass markets in India. This is what's been in conversation about migrants and rural India, and sort of what are the changes, and obviously everyone's seen the news about people migrating back to their homes here, right? So I think there is a lens on these changes that for us is important to understand what happens in this interim period to our target market here, right? Whether they are consumers of products that our companies are providing, or they are producers of products that our companies are buying, right? We work both ways here. So what is happening in these markets? What are the changes that are kind of happening here? Is there going to be, massive number of people pushed down below the poverty line, which then is very hard to engage with in economically led activity here, and then it all moves towards the state side of stuff here, or reverse, right? I mean, there are thoughts right now that, look, there are people who've moved from urban India back to rural India, bringing a lot of the consumption patterns that they've been used to in the city and saying, hey, how do I would still like to avail of these, though I don't want to perhaps be back in a Mumbai or a Delhi or a Bangalore here, right, at this point of time. So I think there is that other lens for us. And that is more, I would say, the markets that we invest in. How do we actually understand changes that are being undergone in those markets specifically than, in a much more 30,000 feet on the macroeconomy. Of course, the macroeconomy has a point of view, has an impact on this, but there are other things as well that are happening in the market. So it's important for us, it's important for our entrepreneurs to work with the segments that they are working with, identify whether those are shrinking or growing, and what other new products or services are kind of needed. Yeah, so I think that's the other lens, right? And the third lens, I would say, is through these different phases, is as an investor lens, and I think Sudhir alluded to this a bit, is about survival, right? And survival, ultimately comes back to, can you adapt? Do you have the cash to survive? Can you come up with the new thing? Can you hustle? Can you kind of like, change yourself overnight? And, one of the things that we see is entrepreneurs are humans too. So different people have different reactions. Some, like the next day, have a solution to solve for COVID, essentially, right? So we have a breast cancer screening company, and 2 days later, she's scanning for fever and saying, why use a thermometer on someone's head when I can scan the public at large and tell you, which person that we should be kind of figuring out what their medical history is at this point of time. So, you have these very immediate things. But I think, again, as an investor, our job through this next phase is to sort of help our entrepreneurs get through that, right? And to get through that, to sort of also read the tea leaves, sort of, play the role of actually advising, helping, bringing in knowledge, saying, how do you actually read the new leaves here to adapt during this interim period and come out on the stronger side, right? Given that most of our investments have been in essential services, so we are very strongly focused on investing in agriculture and health. Majority of our companies have tailwinds, right? Since we invest in technology and digital technologies, we've actually had some of the opposite problems, in the sense where demand has gone through the roof, right? And the company actually, is perhaps not completely geared to service some of that, like telemedicine, right? Telemedicine has been around for a while, but obviously this was a watershed event that has led to how this is getting accessed, right? So I think there are these tailwinds that I'm, and whether the behavior change from the period that we're going to be in this actually drives a lot more of these businesses, changes the consumer, and in our case, the consumer is the next billion or the producer, to actually be onboarding technology a lot faster, is something that, we're navigating through, to say, how do we get on to the other side? Do we actually get to a better, newer normal on the other side, where things are better for everybody here? So, and cash, there is no substitute for cash, right? You have to be able to sort of survive. I think, it's a time for not excesses. This is a time for lean and, working with lean budgets, etc., and making sure that you can stay the runway here. I think one of the concerns as an investor that we've been thinking about, and so far I don't think we've quite faced it, is that I think since we're an early stage investor, we rely on capital coming in from other larger investors. So will there be delays in that capital? So it's more important for us to figure out how you would sort of survive that. So far, I'm an optimist. And, I actually think that there will be more capital that will move to some of what of these essential kind of areas into these markets as well. Because, demand will sort of, in my mind, still grow here, and digitally led demand is something that's going to keep growing in these markets as well. So perhaps it's not going to be bad, but we have to wait and see how that works out.
Yeah. Thanks, Ritu. I think that's a very balanced perspective. Like massive opportunities, like you said, demand everywhere, and newer forms of demand springing up. And like you so rightly put out, this springs from a massive challenge as well. And some sectors and segments have, once again, as you put, face a brunt of this challenge, specifically the migrant labor segment. Salim, question to you, given you and BAT have been focusing on the migrant labor issue across South Asia for a while. How do you assess South Asian governments' responses to the emerging needs of this migrant labor segment? And do you see any innovative models for reintegrating this workforce back into the formal sector, specifically, say, digital and skilling and so on?
Yeah, thanks, Prabhu. Firstly, you're absolutely right. The British Asian Trust has been long associated with causes around skilling, and specifically those of the migrant population. As you're aware, we are a diaspora-led organization, and migration is a very much almost in our DNA. So the current plight and the promise of the migrant friends right now, very, very similar. On the government's response to the emerging needs of the current crisis, uh, I will again talk from my experiences, more specifically from India. Uh, in times of such crisis, the role of the government becomes even more vital. And no government can really ignore a situation when unemployment rates skyrocket from 7% to 27%. And that's really the situation that we are in currently in India. Uh, such unusual situations require really an unusual, uh, you know, partnership approach, I would say, and that would require a lot of agility and flexibility, and people being open to play different roles. We always believe that not-for-profit world has a key role to play in thinking innovatively on where exactly the action and support is needed. Where is the finance needed? What's the role of blended finance, philanthropic capital? How can that come in and support here? So the skill of a good organization really is in knowing how to firstly blend capital streams, not being traditional in approach and thinking in times like these, being unconventional. And that's really the approach that we are trying to adapt at British Asian Trust. Um, that said, finance is but a solution and it's not an answer. So we don't start thinking with a mechanism, we start thinking with an answer. Uh, all governments, including ours, are looking at solutions which are really long term, and I think they're carefully considering what the options at hand are. And digital solution, as Sudhir mentioned earlier, are definitely key in the current situation of social distancing and making way to a new normal that we never thought would exist. So behavioral changes are really bringing digital innovations in the forefront. Ritu highlighted that as well. And impact investors are really assessing current situations and the associated risks. And here, I would say philanthropic capital, which is very ambitious and flexible, can play a very vital role in bringing the overall cost of interventions down significantly and creating large scale and sustainable impact.
Thanks, Salim. I think innovation and innovative financing is definitely the way to go, especially when you're faced with an unprecedented crisis. And it's great to hear you speaking about how different even government actors are coming together on this. Sudhir, question to you. Chirate is a mainstream investor, however, with a strong focus on impact. Given the impetus from COVID-19, has your investment thesis moved aligning financial and social returns? And what are new areas where you're considering or closing an investment or investments, and which you wouldn't have invested earlier, even say a few months back?
Sure. So I think first, yes, we are a financial investor, and we discovered that there is an impact which we are making, and we started measuring it. That's how. So I think the line between outsized financial returns and impact are very thin right now. That's what we have realized. Just to give you an example, at a macro level, and this is related to tech also, because I think the more we go in the future to deliver products and services which are really valuable to the consumer and to businesses uh, for the next 300 to 400 million people, or the next 100 million businesses, compared to the 100 million perhaps which were being produced earlier, technology is going to be absolutely critical. So if you look at the impact, and I'm going to use the word impact at a macro level first and then micro level. The top 15 tech companies in the US contribute 31% value market cap to the GDP. Okay. This is very important because the top 15 companies in terms of market cap have been almost the same, except one or two which have changed in the last 5 years. And by the way, 5 years ago, they were 15 or 16%. So tech company market cap in the US, and which is measurable because it's public, has been growing. And incidentally, the overall market cap to GDP also has been growing from 1.4 to 1.8 over the last 5 years. Compare this to India. If you look at India, there are 22 tech companies in the public markets. And if I look at their GDP, their market cap to GDP in 2019, it's about 8% compared to 31%. So impact, if I may use the word slightly differently at a macro level, is lower. Incidentally, the overall market cap of India has reduced from zero point 0.6 to compared to GDP 5 years ago from 0.6 to 0.5. Why is this happening? Because there's no tech company in the country. But if I look at GDP ratio, market cap to GDP of private tech companies in the country, private tech companies are at 6.7% of GDP. Okay, which means private tech companies in the last 10 years mostly have created market cap almost equal to the public markets, and they're increasing day by day. An investor like us is 1% of GDP. So all investors in the country, right, will create value. So this is very important for us because it does basically means that if the entrepreneur and financial investors are funding very real challenges in the market which could not be solved earlier and now can be solved only using tech, right? They have to use scale as a big measure for financial returns. And to us, they go hand in hand. They're two sides of the coin, financial returns and impact. To give you an example, Cropin is one of our companies in the agri-tech space, and they have now 7 million acres of land in the global markets across 12 or 15 countries, which they manage through satellite-based AI. Okay, and this is one example. We have companies in the healthcare live space, delivering fitness, delivering nutrition, delivering doctor consultations in thousands right now, which they were not doing earlier. And we believe in about a year's time, it'll grow to 1 million plus, okay, at the rate which is growing. So at the macro level, we believe impact to the country is important. At the micro level, we believe impact of solutions to, to the consumer and to the businesses. We have a company called Peelworks. It is efficient supply chain to the Kirana store. It takes away 12% of margin inefficiency in the Kirana store. The revenues have not scaled down. In fact, they just got an investor. And most of the companies which are actually getting term sheets in the last 10 weeks for us are people in that category who are scaling up, okay, after the cost cutting which has happened. How has our strategy changed? I think our strategy has become more deep tech. Our strategy has become very focused on companies which can go global, as well as have a scale and dominant scale within a country like India, has a significant digital component, has a significant online component, and has a very significant deep tech component. We just completed, we have not announced it, but I'll be happy to share. We just completed a investment in a company called Ather. Ather is a company which is designed and manufacturing upper limbs, bionic limbs. There are 10 million people in the world who do not have upper limbs. These are lost due to, on one end, war, road accidents, birth defects, and farming accidents. Okay. In India itself, there are many people. So that's an investment we just made. And is it a financial investment or is it an impact investment? To us, it's a financial investment, which we believe will give outsized returns. That lens was very clear to us. And it's very deep tech, can go global, addresses a large population, and we believe it can become something like $100 million company in maybe 7 to 8 years. Now, does it have impact? Of course it has impact. We are looking at another company which we think will put money in the next 30 days, which is in the area of antibacterial catheters. India consumes 3 crore catheters, and all of them are between 100 to 150 rupees. Okay, and they have no clue, because infections are spread in hospitals through catheters, urinary catheters, and so on and so forth. We're looking at another company which is in the space of extracting color out of bacteria and microbes which are under stress, which are put under stress. By the way, color is chemical, which is very harmful to ecosystem. Color also comes out of vegetation, which requires large tracts of land and water. And large parts of this, by the way, come from China. So there's a supply chain issue. We need to diversify. Indigo and white, beauty products use a titanium oxide component of whiteness, which is carcinogenic in nature. It has to be removed. So is this a market which is worth billions in terms of market size? The answer is yes. Is it a financial return investment or is it an impact investment? To us, the answer is it is both. But we will put a financial lens and we will put a impact lens. Impact is for measurement, okay? And to that extent, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Thanks, Sudhir. I think two big points I took away. One was digital is not just a buzzword. Digital essentially equates to scale, and that's all the more important for you right now. And the second is financial and impact returns are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are converging at a massive scale right now. And by the way, congrats on the investment, especially in a time when we are focusing on the urgent. Physical rehabilitation is a much needed area. So congrats on that. We have been focusing on what has happened and what have we been doing so far. We're just going to shift gears a bit and move into what the long term, as all of you said, this is a long term issue and it's not going away anytime soon. So how should we react to the long term? However, I'm just going to be a bit mindful of time and pedal things a bit faster. It's been almost 2 months since the lockdown. And like the poll that we ran, there are multiple curves that have been predicted, U, V, W, and so on. And all of these hypotheses are finally going to be an impending reality very soon. And we are still uncertain what exact shape that's going to take. Ritu, first question to you. Is there a new normal? Will the migration that we spoke about earlier lead to decentralization of economic centers? And do you see Indian states cashing in on this opportunity to create new business opportunities?
Definitely, I think that is, one of the things that could be possibly positives out of what we have seen here, right? This migration has been driven for multiple different reasons, but whatever it is, there is an economic impact for it. But you could look at it in another way, right? I mean, there is skilled labor that is moving, right, back, right? Or semi-skilled labor that is moving back. Yeah. And, I'm 100% certain there is a percentage that will stay, right? And does that give states an opportunity to decentralize, create other economic centers? I think so. And today, especially, right? Because, as a fund, like one of the things that we believe in here is completely, and this is our investment thesis in most things that we invest in, is that the digital infrastructure that we have built here is unprecedented again. And so hence it allows, we are today, sitting at a crisis, but we're also sitting with an infrastructure that allows business to be done differently. Look at us, we're having a Zoom conference, right? I mean, this would not have been possible, right? ABPN would have canceled its conference, let's say 3 years back or 4 years back, right? So this exact same piece here, right, allows for decentralized work to happen. So is there the opportunity, both from a state perspective as well as from business model perspectives, to say, how do I distribute work centers here, right? How do I leverage the skilled labor, many of which are probably very happy if you give them the same economic opportunity to be living much closer to home than, in whatever unimaginable situations that they do in urban centers, right? Even from a government's perspective, let's think about it, or even from a business perspective, let's think about that, right? The concentration of the economic output in these larger cities, where the outbreak has been much worse, right, has a much larger impact on the economy. We have companies that when they're working, we have companies in Assam, right? And they're kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about, things are, why are we going through this, right? So as a business, if I had much more distributed workforce and distributed centers, I don't have to be fully shut down here, right? I can be for operational. Things can be, green zones opened up much faster than red zones will. So, there are lots of factors here. And I believe that this will lead to new normals, right? There would be new normals that people would now be ready to pick up and say, look, this has worked during this time. We can keep doing this. Maybe we build on it. If I'm a state, I incentivize people to stay back, use their skills and build some stuff here. So that's kind of how I see it. And as I go forward,
yeah. I think interesting, both of you mentioned, Ritu, you said diversification within India when it comes to labor force is important. So you as well spoke about diversification globally in order to reduce risks, and de-risking is going to be the way to look forward. Salim, question to you. You earlier mentioned how BAT is a diaspora organization, and you sit at that crossroads of capital flowing in. COVID-19 appears to have precipitated a lower flow of development finance into low and middle income countries because capital has stayed in country to solve their own domestic crisis. How do you see development finance being shaped in a post-COVID-19 world? And how and where do you see the development sector bringing in newer streams of capital?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Prabhu. I will not deny that uh, every country is trying to solve for its own problems, and the scale of these problems, as we are seeing, are huge, and these are something that we have not witnessed in the past. So every single country is, both philanthropic and private capital has stayed in country because the problems are, nature of those problems are so huge that it's just about or not even enough to solve your own problems. But the reduced cost of capital has really led to increased focus on areas like primary healthcare, which very few acknowledged in the past. And I remember Bill Gates was the only one who really took a leadership on this cause, right since the days when the world battled the Ebola crisis, to say that focus on primary care was very important and critical, and we are seeing it's a reality today. Uh, that said, some vital issues we believe will continue to be in focus, issues around gender, around child protection, which have gained even more significance as the risk of the target populations have really increased in these times of these crises. Uh, so in a post-COVID world, we will firstly have to work together collectively, and the power of collectively will lead to reduce cost of interventions, resulting in larger scale impact. And on streams of capital, I'm hearing my co-panelists. I can say that socially aligned impact investors remain committed to the long-term development agenda. And I can give examples from our collaborative work on our education impact bond, in which our target deliveries are currently looking significantly at risk, owing to the pandemic and the situation with government schools. But our partners like the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, UBS Optimus Foundation, have taken a very balanced view to the current situation and remain totally committed. So huge kudos to them for that. And I would say with this sentiment being intact is really making way for a lot of public-private partnerships, private capital partnering with government funding, at scale, which was really rare in the past. We are into multiple dialogues with the government and ministries like the skills ministries, the NSDC, to really, given our expertise in the skilling space, to really see how we can apply that, use instruments like innovative financing, instruments like impact bonds, result-based financing, which really make a lot of sense right now. You give capital out, which is flexible. You only focus on end outcomes, keep it really simple, and innovate. So clearly current times are those of innovations, times of thinking differently, raising flexible financing, and also applying fundings for innovating and applying them flexibly so that we create long-term impact, and also helps India not really derail from the path that we were on achieving our SDG goals.
Thanks, Salim. Sudhir, last question to you before we transition to the Q&A. You spoke about, say, entrepreneurs who have been pivoting and new capital flowing into companies even as we speak. How should entrepreneurs look at this difficult environment over the next 6 months when capital is difficult to come by? And on the other hand, do you see newer forms of capital, example, Indian rupee capital from family foundations coming in to fill in this gap?
So I'll answer that. Answer is entrepreneurs are buckling down, cash flow positive. That's the kind of company which is solving real problems on a bigger scale now or equal scale, will attract more equity capital. I think debt is back into the form, because if you're cash flow positive, you will get debt, working capital, much easier than if you're making losses. Um, so I think those are let's say playbooks which are already in place in the market space. As far as rupee capital is concerned, then India is less than 2% rupee capital of all total private equity and VC in the country. Last 6-7 years, about 140 billion worth of PE VC was invested in the country. Less than 2 or 3% is rupee capital. It needs to go up. I think there are some rules and regulations. There's policy intervention required for taxation, but fundamentally there's 2 to 2.5 trillion worth of family capital in the country, which needs to get unleashed. There is insurance money, there is provident fund money, which there is massive government intervention required to unleash that capital in the country. My guess is if those are unleashed in the next few months, that 2 to 3% can possibly become 15 or 20% in the next 5 years. That's going to be very big. I'm going to make one statement, and which is a question you've not asked, and which is availability of capital for investors from families, from institutions. As people like us or people in the finance, there are two broadly, the world looks at impact and finance separately. And I think my argument is that if broadly impact is 10, 15, 20% of global private equity VC, and financial investors is 70, 80%, then I think this line is has to be removed. Because if a financial investor, and I'll give you an example, if a financial investor like us has companies addressing crop productivity in 7 million farmers, has a company which has addressed the needs for 20 million mothers, has given corrective eyesight through two of our companies to 10 million people in the country, has given 3 billion, one of our companies called Vina Networks has disbursed 3 billion worth of loans with less than 0.1% NPAs to 800 SMEs over the last 3.5 years in the country, right? This is a financial investor talking. So my very humble request to impact investors is to stretch that boundary and start coming into the financial world also to support from a capital point of view at a massive scale, impact as well as financial investors who have integrated with ESG, who started measuring impact, because it's the other side of the coin to solving real problems. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Sudhir. We'll now transition to the audience Q&As. Quite a few coming in. First one to both Sudhir, you and Ritu. I know you are giving out term sheets as we speak. Given the uncertainties, do you suggest any additional core metrics that investors look out for when evaluating different investment opportunities?
Ritu, would you like to go first?
Sure, yes, we have closed 2 investments in this period. So obviously we're bullish on that. I think our focus here is to make sure that the companies are adequately capitalized here, so that we're not facing capital crunches during this time, and they have ample room to actually, we are very early stage investors, right? So we come into the companies at a pretty much a seed stage level here. So our focus has been to make sure that we have enough capital, and that's through us and through co-investors as well, so the companies have enough runway here. Now, metrics get set differently for different companies depending on where they're kind of headed. And, I think that watch still remains. So I think perhaps, for example, like, we're just investing into a agri-tech supply chain company. And, there are some segments today that would have been metrics yesterday that are not there, right? So I think there is an analysis of the situation, and there is an adjustment to the metrics for that particular business that you've invested in. But I think the most critical piece here is, thinking about the fact that there should be enough runway here, that you don't cut it short because, you're putting too little cash in here.
Thanks, Ritu. Yeah.
Yeah, I think similar. I think the only thing which I'll add is um, it's taking a bit longer to finalize the term sheets for the simple reason that we do want to watch as India opens up. What's the relevance of that product and market fit, and are consumers and businesses actually consuming? So if at a seed stage or early stage, series A, we would have taken maybe 3 months to evaluate that. We may take a bit longer because we want to see really if that's scaling at a pre-investment level overall. And I think the bar on being innovative, being very deep tech, and the financing of the company also perhaps including debt is something which we are always looking at right now. But deep tech technology will play a massive role. And I think that's a very big differentiator. If technology elements are smaller, then we may have a problem.
And just to add to that, Sudhir, that's what, we've always said, that tech has to be fairly critical over here. And I think the one thing for us is that, a lot of the sectors and a lot of the markets that we've looked at, right? I mean, we're a long-term investor, right? So this is not a short-term play.
Yeah.
So the view is much more about will these pan out? So when I invest in agri and food, I know that we will all still eat, right? I may think about demand shifts as to what we would eat, but fundamentally, that the long-term piece for this is there, and there is nothing. Yes, you've got to navigate the intermediate period, but I think it's important. It's not important, it's essential, because we are equity investors for the long term, that the long-term view has to be there. Yeah. So I think that's another lens that I should have.
And Prabhu, may I just add one more point? I think from a regulatory perspective, there are many things opening up right now. For instance, the farm sector, there has been many regulations which have opened up, which were very restrictive to growing an agri company, and not agri-tech, an agri company to national scale, because farmers could not ship out products from one state to the other. Now that has been removed, technology then comes in and builds on top of the layer, which is physical in nature. So it's not removed from the physical layer. It's on top of the physical layer, especially when regulatory is removed.
Yeah. Thanks both. Next question to you, Salim. So given the new normal, to what extent is working with the government more or less important? For example, public-private partnerships.
In times of crisis, and especially when you're looking at not just short-term and immediate solutions, but solutions which are longer term, I think involving and partnering with the government is perhaps the right approach, and for two reasons. Firstly, issues like the one that we are battling right now, the scale is enormous, and if we want to have impact at scale, you need that kind of capital to come in, and which is not tied capital. So I think involving the government with the approach of providing flexible financing and making impact at scale, that's one. And second, and very, very important aspect is what Sudhir just mentioned, is regulatory flexibility. If you want to test out models, innovate, try and see what works, what does not, you would require a lot of flexibility with the regulatory frameworks, which are fairly tight actually in India. So I think partnering with the government allows that to happen as well, if government has an approach of being slightly more flexible, looking at the approach differently. I think that makes a lot of difference. So especially in times like these, public-private partnerships are perhaps a great way to try and make long-term impact.
Couldn't agree more, Salim. The last question to the panelists. I know we spoke about tech quite a bit, both from the investing perspective, and Salim, you spoke about it in the context of skilling as well. And there's obviously naturally a lot of emphasis given the scenario we are in. But are there other segments which have been going under the radar that investors should be looking at apart from tech? Because just tech is not going to solve all of the problems.
So, I think it's important. Again, I go back to what I said earlier. everything in the country. So I'll give you a very simple example. If road building is a very big exercise which the country is taking, you know, we hear numbers like 30 kilometers a day compared to 9 kilometers 8-9 years ago. Okay. Um, but road building does not use technology. I think technology, there is nothing called no technology company or no technology in a daily life to me. Road building does not use technology because we can see it every 6 months. You have to relay loads. I mean, we've seen roads in Bangalore which have been uprooted because traffic is less. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? So effectively what I'm saying is technology has to be a daily affair. It is not high tech. You want to build a solid road which can last for 10 years or 20 years, there is a technology to it. And that has to be used. There is a technology to driving. There is a technology to healthcare. There is a technology to agriculture. Building a storage facility, right? If you look at the Food Corporation of India, right? They were just brick and mortar silos. There was no temperature sensitive mechanisms to monitor temperature itself or humidity in the early days. Today also, I'm not too sure what is used there, but just IoT can make a brick and mortar much, much more productive. The government has immense amount of resources under its belt, which are lying underutilized. Whether you look at schools, whether you look at food grain silos in the country, whether you look at roads being constructed completely inefficiently. So the moment you bring technology inside, right, on a daily basis, we will have phenomenal efficiency coming in.
Can I add to that just a little bit? So at least for us at Ankur Capital, technology means digital, but it also means, you know, game-changing products, etc., that you can have, right? Yeah, and I just want to give you, I mean, and it plays a role. The digital technology obviously plays a role in efficiency as an overlayer in many ways. Is one way is how that is used. The other way that it is used is the fact that when you have a deep tech or, you know, you're supplementing skills that might be missing in markets that will take forever to kind of, like for example, in one of our investor companies, radiologists, right? Radiologists will take forever in India to scale to be able to cover the country. You can take AI today and actually cover some part of it. But there's another very important piece, and I'm super passionate about this, is that, you know, a lot of product technology development has happened with a very Western-centric view that doesn't necessarily work in India, it doesn't necessarily work in Asia, right? Because of the way the market structures are kind of done. And so we are left with, you know, a trickle-down effect that happens many, many years later, right? But now we're actually seeing entrepreneurs, you know, innovating, and actually IP-led high R&D companies innovating for contextually, right? And when innovation happens contextually, you can have huge step changes, right? So for example, we're invested in a company that produces protein using methane or biogas and bacteria, right? Now, yes, there are global other companies that kind of do this, but these guys, the cutting edge tech is that I can do this with a $4 or $5 million CapEx investment, which I can distribute across many different centers, as opposed to having a very massive company like Cargill put in $400 million to create a, you know, a massive thing and, you know, control supply chains that way, right? Now, that would not happen if you did not have an entrepreneur who was innovating at a very high level contextually, right? Because if you're sitting in a US market and innovating, that's what's around you, right? You know this will work at that scale. You know the capital exists. Whereas here, you know that that does not exist. So I think that's an important trend that we see. It's not a tsunami today, but I think it's a trend that will grow. And I think markets like India, markets like Asia will see those game-changing innovations also come in. And that has nothing to do with digital. That has to do much more with physical products that are being created here.
Thanks, Ritu. Thanks for that. A lot more questions, but due to paucity of time, I'm going to transition to the AVPN team to close out the session. Over to you.
Thank you, Prabhu, Sudhir, Ritu, and Salim for this insightful session. It's wonderful and heartwarming to see the impact in the investment community rallying together post-COVID to continue supporting entrepreneurs and businesses doing social good. Thank you to all the listeners for their active participation. We have now come to the end of this session, and we have a last poll where you could perhaps put in your views as to which sector would be the beneficiary post-COVID-19 in the post-COVID-19 world. We'll close the poll in about 10 seconds. And you can answer more than one sector if you think it's going to be the beneficiary. Can you please close the poll, please? It looks like everybody believes that healthcare and online education, they're pretty much head-to-head, will be the beneficiary. That includes upskilling as well. Please take note, Salim. As I said, we've now come to the end of this session. The session was made possible with the kind support of our lead partners, Stockholm Environment Institute, Chandler Foundation, and Yidan Prize Foundation, and our knowledge partner, Standard Chartered Private Bank. You can continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates in this session. Please make full use of the AVPN Connector app, which can be found in the resource section. Also, please share the highlights of this session on social media and tag us using hashtag AVPN2020. You can also explore our new prototype online platform, AVPN Academy, at academy.avpn.asia, and our events platform for our upcoming webinars for impact funds and family offices. Please do join us at the next session, Maximizing Social Impact with Family Offices, starting right after. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.